There is a profound difference between a madman and a monster. A madman acts on impulse. A monster acts on a plan. When we look back at the tragedy of Jonestown, the images are so shocking that it's easy to assume the people involved had simply lost their minds. But true psychological horror doesn't start with a scream. It starts with a whisper. It starts with someone telling you exactly what you want to hear. To understand how over 900 people were silenced in a remote South American jungle, we have to look away from the jungle and look at a small, quiet town in Indiana. James Warren Jones was born in 1931 in Crete, Indiana. He did not have a normal childhood. While other children were playing games, young Jim was obsessed with religion and death. Neighbors reported that he would wander the town, collecting the bodies of dead animals he found on the road. He wouldn't just bury them. He would hold elaborate funerals for them in his backyard, standing behind a makeshift pulpit, preaching to the other neighborhood children. He was practicing. Even as a boy, he understood the power of an audience. He realized that if you speak with enough absolute certainty, people will look to you for guidance. He craved that control. By the 1950s, Jones had grown into a charismatic young man. He became a pastor in Indianapolis. At the time, America was deeply segregated. But Jim Jones did something that shocked his community. He actively invited African Americans into his congregation. He founded the People's Temple. He preached a message of absolute racial equality and socialism. He adopted children of different races, calling them his rainbow family. He opened soup kitchens, nursing homes, and employment centers for the destitute. If you were a marginalized person in the 1960s, if society had cast you aside, ignored you, or oppressed you, Jim Jones looked like a savior. He looked like the only man who actually cared. But a savior doesn't ask for your absolute submission. As the church grew, Jones began to test the boundaries of his control. He realized that to keep his followers completely dependent on him, he needed to isolate them from the rest of the world. He moved the People's Temple out of Indiana and out to California, eventually settling in San Francisco. He convinced his followers that a nuclear apocalypse was coming, and that staying close to him was their only chance at survival. Thousands of people followed him. They sold their homes. They handed their life savings over to the temple. They signed over the custody of their children. Once he had them isolated in California, the psychological breaking process began in earnest. Jones claimed he was a prophet. He claimed he could read minds and heal the sick. During his massive, theatrical church services, elderly people in wheelchairs would suddenly stand up and walk. Women would cough up what looked like cancerous tumors, which Jones claimed he had miraculously removed. It was all an illusion. Survivors later admitted that the people in the wheelchairs were paid actors. The tumors Jones pulled from people's throats were actually rotting chicken livers he had hidden in his hands. It was smoke and mirrors, but to the desperate people watching, it was proof that Jim Jones was a god. Behind closed doors, the temple was turning into a prison camp. Jones began wearing dark sunglasses indoors at all times, hiding his eyes. He was becoming increasingly paranoid, fueled by a heavy addiction to amphetamines and painkillers. He instituted what he called catharsis sessions. If a member questioned him or broke a rule, they were brought to the front of the congregation. They were forced to endure brutal physical beatings from their own friends and family members, while the crowd cheered. He forced married couples to divorce, claiming that all romantic love belonged only to him. He kept his followers awake for days at a time with mandatory 6-hour-long sermons. He was sleep-depriving them. He was breaking their familial bonds. He was slowly replacing their internal voices with his own. But by 1977, the outside world was closing in. Former members who had managed to escape began speaking to the press. An investigative piece was about to be published in New West magazine, exposing the beatings, the financial fraud, and the psychological abuse inside the temple. Jim Jones knew that if the article was published, the government would raid his church. He would lose his empire. He would go to prison. Like a cornered predator, he decided to take his prey and run. Months prior, anticipating that he might need a sanctuary, Jones had purchased a massive plot of land in the dense jungles of Guyana, a small nation in South America. Why Guyana? Because it was a socialist country, sympathetic to his political views. Because it was English-speaking. But most importantly, because it was completely isolated. It was surrounded by miles of impenetrable rainforest, far away from the United States media, far away from American laws, and far away from the families of his victims. When the news article hit the stands, Jones panicked. He ordered his followers to pack their bags immediately. Within days, hundreds of Americans vanished from San Francisco, boarding flights to South America. They were told they were going to a socialist utopia, a paradise free from racism and cruelty. When they arrived at the Jonestown agricultural project, the gates of the prison finally locked behind them. There was no utopia. The settlement was a muddy, sweltering labor camp. The temperature regularly soared past 100 degrees. The soil was so poor that the crops failed, leaving the members to survive on little more than rice and watery gravy. Upon arrival, Jones's armed guards confiscated everyone's passports. There were no telephones, no televisions, no outgoing mail that wasn't strictly read and censored by the guards. But the most oppressive presence in Jonestown wasn't the heat or the starvation. It was the tower. In the center of the camp, Jones had constructed a massive loudspeaker system. For 24 hours a day, his voice echoed across the compound. Even while they slept, they had to listen to him ranting. He read them fake news. He told them that the United States had devolved into race wars. He told them that the Ku Klux Klan was marching through the streets of California, and that if they ever tried to leave the jungle, they would be hunted down and destroyed. He convinced them that the jungle was the only safe place left on Earth. Then, the rehearsals began. Jones became obsessed with the idea that the CIA or mercenaries were coming to raid the camp. He instituted a terrifying drill known as the White Nights. In the dead of night, a siren would wail. The exhausted, terrified members were forced from their beds and herded into the main pavilion. Armed guards surrounded them in the dark. Jones would stand at the front and announce that the camp was under attack. He told them the only way out was revolutionary. He would force everyone to drink a cup of fruit punch, telling them it was laced with poison. Mothers held their crying children. Families sat in the dirt, weeping, waiting to die. After 30 minutes of agonizing terror, Jones would laugh. He would tell them it was just a loyalty test. He subjected them to this psychological torture over and over again. He was deliberately eroding their will to live, conditioning them so that when the real order finally came, they would be too broken to fight back. The breaking point arrived in November of 1978. Back in the United States, families of the temple members had relentlessly lobbied the government to investigate Jonestown. Finally, California Congressman Leo Ryan agreed to fly to Guyana with a news crew to see the camp for himself. When Ryan's plane landed at the jungle airstrip, Jones was terrified. He forced the members to put on a grand show. For the first night of the visit, the congressman saw people singing, dancing, and claiming to be perfectly happy. But the truth is impossible to hide forever. During the festivities, a terrified member bumped into an NBC reporter and secretly slipped him a crumpled piece of paper. When the reporter opened it, it was a desperate plea for help. It contained a list of names of people who wanted to escape. The next morning, Congressman Ryan confronted Jim Jones. He announced that anyone who wanted to leave could board the planes and return to America. A few incredibly brave families stepped forward, defying their captor. Jones looked completely defeated. He watched them pack their bags. He even offered a dump truck to drive them to the airstrip, but he was already planning his final act of control. As the congressman, the journalists, and the defectors arrived at the dirt runway, the dump truck from Jonestown suddenly pulled up. Several men belonging to Jones's elite security team jumped out of the back. They leveled their rifles and opened fire. The attack was a massacre. Congressman Leo Ryan, 3 journalists, and a defector were eliminated on the tarmac. Several others were gravely wounded, fleeing into the dense jungle to hide. Back at the compound, the news reached Jim Jones. He knew exactly what he had done. By assassinating a United States congressman, He had guaranteed that the American military would soon be parachuting into the jungle. His empire was finished, but Jim Jones was a man who would rather destroy his toys than let anyone else have them. He picked up his microphone and called for the final white night. He gathered all 900 members into the pavilion. He told them that Ryan was dead and that the military would arrive at any moment to torture their children. A large metal vat was dragged into the center of the room. This time, the fruit punch was mixed with heavy sedatives and a lethal dose of cyanide. We know the exact horrifying details of this night because a cassette recorder was left running on Jones's podium. That recording is public. You can easily find it right here on YouTube by searching for the Jonestown death tape. But I chose not to play the most graphic parts for you today. The reality of those final 44 minutes is simply too disturbing to broadcast. Jones ordered the medical staff to administer the mixture to the babies and the children first. He knew that if the parents were forced to watch their children suffer, their own will to survive would completely shatter. On the tape, the sound of the jungle is drowned out by the screams of mothers begging for mercy. But the pavilion was tightly surrounded by a ring of Jones's guards, armed with crossbows and shotguns. It was a terrifying ultimatum. If you tried to run into the jungle, you were shot. If you refused the drink, it was forced down your throat with a syringe. One by one, the crying stopped. The families laid down in the tall grass together, holding each other as the poison burned through their nervous systems. Jim Jones stood at the podium, demanding that they die with dignity, demanding that they stop crying. By the early hours of the morning, 918 people were gone, and the architect of it all, the man who demanded absolute loyalty and sacrifice. When it was his turn, Jim Jones proved to be exactly what he always was, a coward. He did not drink the bitter poison. Instead, he retreated to his chair and ended his own life with a single gunshot to the head. When authorities finally walked into the silent camp the next day, they witnessed a scene that forever altered the course of history. If you found tonight's dive into the dark unsettling, leave a like on the video. It tells the algorithm to share this history with others. Let me know in the comments below if you have ever listened to the actual audio from that night, or what dark chapter of history you want me to uncover next. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a descent into the unknown. Thank you for watching. Sleep well.